可是我们就
独立介绍只要问题就好，因为时间比较有限。OK， 可以把你们的介绍转为问题。
有很简单，应该没有尝试。
我们等客人进来。
对，只有简单的，
就只有题目。
就是没有尝试。
第一个就是看到那个网页。
So use the share screen function so that we can.
So everyone is here, ready? 那些线上的都有。好像不够，电力不够。可能如果帮忙待会儿讲一下。可是那个刚才红灯有亮，不知道是不是电视看的。哦，现在有了。Very good. So we're very happy that we have a series of presentations or talks by our postdoc fellows. So they are young scholars. Okay, they just finished their doctoral degree program, and maybe after a few years of postdoc fellows fellowship, and then some of them have become our full-time teachers. Okay, Desmond and Lungzi, and some of them are our current postdoc fellows, assisting our center to conduct our joint research project. Okay. There's one more postdoc fellow, Stacy Luo. She will be joining us from January the 1st. Okay, so you'll be seeing them around this building very often. So all of our webinars and our working paper series, okay, and our other projects are assisted by this excellent postdoc fellows. So I think today we'll need no introduction from our students. Okay, they will introduce themselves because we have a limited time. But we do want to learn from them what are their problematics that will push them forward for their long-term research project. Okay, how do they connect their doctoral degree project to their ongoing project? Okay, what are their research questions they want to conduct stage by stage? Okay, what do they think they will do from now on? Okay, continuing from their previous project and onward. Even how do they design their courses? Okay, because they have a couple of courses they will be offering next semester. So we will move on from the first one to the fifth one, just non-stop. Then we'll take a 10 minutes break, and then we will start our question and answer discussion in the second session. All right. So let's welcome Desmond. Yeah. Everyone will have 20 or 22 minutes.
Okay, I'll try my best to finish it. Okay. So thanks for Professor Liu's invitation. So I'm Dr. Desmond Sham. I'm now currently teaching here. So today I would like to talk about an issue that really puzzles me for a few years and until now. So the topic I'm talking about is mind the gap doing postcolonial studies of East and Southeast Asia. So this picture, I took this photo while I was studying in London, at the London Overground. So in the London Overground, you constantly hear this mind the gap kind of announcement. So first of all, may I do a quick round of survey. Could come from a place that has been colonized. Please raise your hand.
Everyone. Except Polish guy. Are you sure you are not
First of all,
colonized?
number two, could come from a place that has colonized others. Okay, so how about the remaining? Does anyone thinking that colonialism hasn't affected them? Okay, great. Pretty sure everyone thinks that colonialism has been affecting them. Then my next question
Both
is...
ways, make sure.
And my next question is, who have taken any courses related to postcolonial studies before? Okay, so here's something interesting. So everyone believes that colonialism has been affecting them in one way or another. But not everyone has taken courses on postcolonial studies. I would like to know some of the reasons. Or do anyone think that postcolonial studies are relevant to them? Okay, people think that postcolonial studies are not that relevant to them. That's the interesting thing, and that is the point I would like to start here, and I would like to persuade you that it is relevant to you. But it is that irrelevant is because of the way that we are doing it at this moment. So let's start from my PhD project. So my whole PhD studies project started because of this. So when I was doing my master's degree at the University of Hong Kong, there is a huge preservation movement, urban social movement, that calls for the preservation of two piers in Hong Kong. So in 2006 and 2007. So it is a urban social movement that clearly uses the term decolonization and local in the process. But the trickiest thing is what they want to preserve as a pier called Queen's Pier. So in a sense that it is a form of colonial heritage. But the activists were saying that, no, we are not preserving the pier because we are yearning for the colonial past, but exactly because we would like to decolonize the city's history. So they articulate the events took place there. So the previous urban social movements took place there, and the lower right hand corner, so you can see the at that time in the 1970s, Chinese is not the official language in Hong Kong. So people are protesting at that pier to fight for, okay, let's recognize Chinese as one of the official language in Hong Kong. So so my whole PhD project is working on one issue, is how can heritage preservation function as a resistance and decolonization projects. And I did my PhD in the UK. So this is something a little bit tricky here. Number one, the preservation law in the UK is functioning pretty well. And indeed in Hong Kong, it followed the British when they first started writing the law, but they haven't updated the legislation. But number two, some people in the UK indeed associate heritage with something negative. Okay, why you guys are really concerning about all these old relics? Are you guys really conservative, yearning for the imperial past, blah blah blah? Those issues are really puzzling over there. So this is one of the questions I need to deal with. Okay, why I still need to talk about preserving cultural heritage? Another story I would like to talk about. This is the building. This is at the university I was studying, Goldsmiths, University of London. So this building was called, this building was called New Academic Building, and it's now called Professor Stewart Hall Building. So Professor Stewart Hall, of course, the pioneer figure of cultural studies in the UK. But first of all, please remember that he migrated to the UK from the Caribbean. So this is very important. And the journal Postcolonial Studies organized a round table at this building where I was studying in the UK, because the editorial board of Postcolonial Studies, the UK branch of the editorial board, was based at Goldsmiths, so Sandra Zaffa there, Mike Dutton there. So at that round table, we talked about the future of Postcolonial Studies. I was there. So I sitting there, looking around the whole room, observe the population. So that's quite important. So what I found out that, in the whole room, a lot of Afro-Caribbean population, a lot of brown guys and brown girls, but pretty well. But when you compare with the population of the university, there are only a handful East and Southeast Asian students there. So this is the questions we need to be thought about. So why we have a huge East and Southeast Asian population in the university, and why a forum on Postcolonial Studies was not attended by so many East and Southeast Asian students there. So there are two reasons I can think of. Number one, East and Southeast Asian students do not think that Postcolonial Studies is relevant to them. Number two, mainstream postcolonial theories fail to touch upon the experiences of East and Southeast Asia, so that people from these regions find postcolonial studies less relevant to them. And I believe number two is one of the main reasons. And when I was studying in the UK, or wherever there are different talks on we need to decolonizing the curriculum. In the UK, we use the term BAME, B-A-M-E, that is Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnics. By Asians, they mean South Asian. So unlike the United States, when they mention Asian, they pretty much mean East Asian. So here is the point. So there is a lot of these programs we need to think about decolonizing blah blah blah, decolonizing blah blah blah. Pretty much concerning the experience of the black and brown population in the UK, but not that much on the East and Southeast Asian population. And this is the thing I would like to deal with. So there are definitely gaps in postcolonial studies that we really need to think about. Is postcolonial studies nowadays become another Eurocentric model, as Shomeshi has talked about? What does it mean? Because many of because the current theories are drawing from mainly the experiences from former British and French colonies in South Asia and Africa. And Chonghwa in 2008 has already talked about that lack of the concern in Southeast Asia. Number two, this kind of West and non-West framework also got some problem is it seems to put the whole non-West into one, a big area that's you don't really talk about much difference. And in this part of the world, I think we really need to talk about two issues as well. How about the empires in Asia? China, Japan. How about settler colonialism? Internal colonialism. Well, let's think about this piece of land we are now sitting at and standing on. Yes, and the late Eric Derlick published that article, Taiwan, the land colonialism's made. That is one of the points he mentioned, the settler colonialism and internal colonialism. So what can we do? Can we provincialize post-colonial theory? So if you talk about provincializing Europe, at the same time, is it also possible to provincialize or localize post-colonial theories? That is, well, there are post-colonial theories that is not applicable in other post-colonial contexts. You need to recognize. Or multiplying, multi-directional colonialism, post-colonialism. For instance, to look beyond the Western European empires. Such as repositioning the locale. I will give you an example of repositioning the locale using my own research. And multiplying the reference points. For instance, other locales in the region, other settler societies we can look at. Look at the Caribbean. In this part of Asia, I think looking at the Caribbean is one of a good way to go beyond the many problems. And how about think about the Soviets? In 2017, a book published called Soviet Post-Colonial Studies. So this is also something that we can actually reference to. So these two papers developed from my PhD thesis. So one in English, one in Chinese. Generally, I reposition Hong Kong as a positive. I bring back that history. Yeah. So nowadays in Hong Kong, we often talking about viewing Hong Kong as the southern tip of China. And in this sense, you're trapping Hong Kong into that China, British, and Hong Kong triangle. So what my papers does was I reposition Hong Kong as a former British colonial port city in Southeast Asia. So the boundary of Southeast Asia is a little bit tricky here. Nowadays, when we talk about Southeast Asia, we often limit it to ASEAN countries. But okay, we know that Southeast Asia is also an invention of the geographic notion of Southeast Asia is an invention of the empire. This is something we understand. But I recall one history as well, where I was a high school, not even high school, I was a primary school kid. When Hong Kong was still a British colony, so we were taught that Hong Kong is located in Southeast Asia. So put this into the thinking. So we're positioning Hong Kong as a former British colonial port city in Southeast Asia. So that is, instead of viewing this map from the Northeast Asia, you put it southward. At the same time, you're multiplying the reference point for Hong Kong. For instance, Hong Kong can be referenced with the experience of Singapore, Penang, and Malacca. So in my PhD dissertation, I mainly deal with Hong Kong, Singapore, and Penang. But I'm not going to talk about that. So at the same time, I'm not only multiplying the reference points for Hong Kong, I'm also multiplying the reference points for Southeast Asian port cities. So we're calling Hong Kong's part of a colonial port city, which is multiracial and multicultural. Indeed also help to challenge the nationalist or ethno-nationalist discourses about Hong Kong. I don't have the time to talk about this. I put this in one of my courses, so this is so we can talk about this later. So how to understand port cities? Port cities is the nodal points in the maritime trade networks. It has been existing before the colonizers came to this part of the world. And historically, many of them has been semi-autonomous. Well, you're at the marginal position of the nation, but that marginal position means that you have better connection with other port cities in the same region. So they're closer with each other rather than hinterland. So when you look at the world through the sea, through the maritime, you actually goes beyond the imagination of nation states building upon land and continents. Indeed, even in the British colonial context, the British colonial empire, they separate the ruling of colonial port cities and other land-based colonies. This is one of the issues we find that if you want to deal with Hong Kong, if you want to deal with Singapore, Penang, Malacca, sometimes you find some of the existing theories inadequate. This is one of the reasons. So there's some visually there's something very comparable. On the left hand side is the photograph of the statue of the Queen Victoria in Singapore's Government House, and all these local Chinese elites in Singapore, dressed in these Chen courts costume, or many of them bought title from Chen courts, but sometimes you just don't know whether they bought the title or they just bought the costume. On the right hand side is the Chonghwa Hospital, one of the earliest hospital in Hong Kong, found also by these local Chinese elites. Similarly, the board meeting, if you only look at the photo, you think that it is a meeting of a group of Chen court Mandarin. But no, there are these group of local Chinese elites, just like this. So these group of people are common features you found in the colonial port cities, not limited to ethnic Chinese, but also the other groups. Who are they? They're the commodores. They're the middlemen. Okay, just leave your value judgment aside a little bit. So if you think about the commodores and middlemen, Robinson used the term collaborative colonialism to describe that. And collaborative colonialism is tricky, is that Robinson himself translates it into Chinese as 高阶式殖民主义. The Chinese term 高阶 is, that's a value judgment, but I will translate his term into 写作式殖民主义. 写作, I use a more value neutral way to describe. So you have a group of so-called colonized elites. They collaborate, they cooperate. What kind of term and you want to use with the colonizers? And one of the things interesting is your loyalty or not. It is not something important. It's not born with you. It is just choice. It is a tattoo. So you maximize your profits, your interests, by actively showing your loyalty and disloyalty to both the colonizers and the local empires. That's why these people need to, at the same time, presenting a green screen statue to the British monarch, but at the same time, dress as a Chinese officer. They need to buy title from Chen court. whether they're loyal or not, hard to tell. So in this sense, collective colonialism in that destabilizing the relationship between colonizers and the colonized. And anti-imperialist, anti-imperial. I would like. I was to be typing anti-imperialist nationalism. It also problematized anti-imperialist nationalism that puts anti-imperialism as a form of nationalism, because it is really hard to tell about their loyalty, nationalistic interests. It is really hard to tell. And if we and this is not limited to Hong Kong. It also takes place in Singapore, in Penang, in many of these treaty ports, colonial port cities, even in Taiwan. And if we think about, we push a step forward, we think about interest or purpose. If we include political ambitions into one of the so-called interests and purpose, why they choose to side with the colonizers and the other empire, why they play with these in-betweenness, then there are lots of things we can do in this part of the world. Where we can rewrite many of our understandings. And the article I mentioned, the late Stirling, for the late Stirling, in his Taiwan, the Land Colonialisms Made, it is not only an article about Taiwan, but also about China, about Hong Kong, and about this part of the world. In his final 2 paragraphs, he states that it is important, nevertheless, to resist the confusion of geopolitical with historical realities. In the Chinese nationalist perspective, whether on the mainland or in Taiwan or in Hong Kong, unification will bring to an end the colonial legacies of division for Taiwanese, Hong Kongers, and others who believe in the possibilities of different ways of being Chinese or not being Chinese at all. It appears equally legitimate as the latest chapter in the colonial history of the region. In this perspective, coloniality is as much a problem within the nation as it is in the relations between nations. I guess he has proposed a lot for us to think in this part of the world. So, yeah, these are the 2 courses I'm going to offer. In the past, some 20 minutes, I'm focusing on some of the things, not all, but just some of the things that I will include in my courses, in my course Postcolonial Studies and Decolonization. And in this course, well, we read some classics, but I think more importantly, I'll bring in a lot of text that we seldom talk about. So regardless whether you have taken courses related to Postcolonial Studies or not, well, there are lots of things we can discuss in this course. And the second course is about urban cultures in East and Southeast Asia. So in general, I'm also doing urban studies and urban culture studies in this part of the world. So we're talking about issues such as culture economy, culture industry, sense of place, urban cultural heritage, and even some film related to the urban scene in this part of the world. So, thank you very much.
Very good. Next one?
是电视看不到你这边，但是我就挺想试过一次了。
Sorry. Okay. I have a spoon. Okay, my apology. Shouldn't laugh in the beginning. Hi everyone. My name is Tang Hui-Yu. I'm now a postdoctoral researcher in International Center for Cultural Studies. And I received my doctoral degree and finished my PhD dissertation in year 2017. And my PhD dissertation mainly involves the theme of decolonial term in cultural theory and its influence on the contemporary art. And for my dissertation, I mainly look into three trajectories in cultural studies. The first is provincializing Europe as a critical strategy discussed in Depeche Chakrabarty. And the second is psychoanalytical process of decolonization discussed by Ashish Nandi. And the third, maybe some of you are more familiar, is decolonization as an epistemic shift by our professor here in this department, Chen, and one of the visiting professor in, I think, 2010, by Professor Sun Ge. So the first part of my PhD thesis mainly involves a large amount of debate with these theories. The second part of my thesis, I take the contemporary Taiwanese artist Chen as an instance. And the purpose of taking this as an instance is to put forward the decolonial agenda discussed today from a more, let's say, culturalistic aspect to the social realistic. But I will not unpack my PhD dissertation because it's been 3 years and life has moved on. So my current research, which is also the project I'm doing currently, first of all, my motive is that I realized that my PhD dissertation has not involved a historical approach or a historical analysis of a certain period, which makes my PhD dissertation a surface of theory, a surface of theoretical discussion. So that's why I am now shifting my research back to a specific period of time that involves a decolonial term. And the historic period of time I choose is 1970s. Why 1970s? Because that was the time when nativist cultural movement in Mandarin, 乡土文化运动 took place in Taiwan. And that was also the time when decolonial spirit prevails. And I also do not want to contain my research within my own country. And I want to do a comparative study between another Asian country. And why so? And why I choose countries such as Philippines. Two main reasons. The first is I started doing a TV series research from the 1970s of Taiwan. So I go back and review a lot of materials from that part of the from that period, and I encounter Li Shuangze's writing on the Philippines, and they are large amount. And the second reason is that although Taiwan and Philippines share the same geopolitical and military position, but domestically the space for political expression through art is very different, and we will see later. So by looking at another Asian country to form a comparative study. The purpose is that I can look back to my own. So the nativist cultural movement in Taiwan spanned the period from 60s to the 70s. And nativist, I found this translation to be imperfect. I haven't found a perfect translation of that. The Mandarin is xiangtu, and what xiangtu means is xiang means rural or home, and tu means soil or land. So I would better understand it as a quest for things of our own, which is more precise than the term nativism, because nativism sounds very narrow, provincial. Yeah. So we can basically see the movement as an intellectual shift that critically examines the acceptance of Western-oriented culture and turning many intellectuals away from Euro-America-centered perspective to looking inward at the things of our own. And also this decolonial term influences many cultural realms, including literature, which is the realm that most of people talk about. But in fact, its influence is crossing all the cultural realms, not just literature, but music, visual art, heritage preservation, etc. So I'll briefly introduce the social political background of this period. The first is martial law. I think maybe many of you have already studied this part of Taiwanese history. So 60s to 70s is the time when global student movement and social movement flourish around the world. And China's Cultural Revolution is kernel of this rising of global leftism. So during this period of time, Taiwan's situation is an anti-leftist Cold War regime aligned with the U.S. But on the other hand, which is different from, for example, U.S., they don't have civil war, but we have. At the same time, it is a civil war with the People's Republic of China. Despite a fire ceased, but it has not yet ended, and it has not yet ended now. Taiwan's martial law is therefore a result of both unended civil war and the global Cold War. And what's taking place in the, let's say, second stage of this period is since the 1970, the year 1970. The rising of global leftism since the late 60s not only triggered worldwide social movement, it also successfully mobilized third world countries in the United Nations and eventually allowed the United Nations to recognize People's Republic of China to be the only representative of China, and thus exclude ROC, which is Taiwan, out of the legitimacy. And this is year 1971, along with the sovereignty dispute over Diaoyu Island, occurred a year before, marked the beginning of Taiwan's peculiar international status. And throughout the decade of 70s, Taiwan has rapidly lost its official diplomatic relation with 49 countries in the world. So that was that was one of the major triggers that strengthened nativist cultural movement at this time. Because of this diplomatic crisis, many of the intellectual feeling of being an international orphan. But ironically, this kind of sentiment also allowing some political space for expression for the intellectuals. So, okay, let's get into the specific content of this movement in visual art. The first, nativist term, in fact, it initiated in music and literary realm in early to mid 1960s. And the turn in visual art came later. It took place in early 70s. And I would mainly divide the turn in visual art into two paths, the cultural and the political. And let's talk about the cultural first. I would take a magazine called Echo. In Mandarin is Han Sheng. The first issue is out in 1971, and the purpose of this magazine is to preserve the traditions of folk art, 民间艺术, by fieldwork and well-researched narrative. Okay. Although Echo magazine is not a direct product of Kuomintang's cultural policy, but somehow it somehow echoes the state's cultural Cold War agenda enacted through Chinese cultural Renaissance movement. I will briefly recap Chinese cultural Renaissance movement. So, in year 1966, the Cultural Revolution took place in China. So, Kuomintang in Taiwan, they staged a cultural Cold War against China's Cultural Revolution in the same year. And that is the motive that Kuomintang enacted a series of cultural policies through Chinese Cultural Renaissance movement in the same year. And if we see it in terms of some sort of dogma, its purpose is trying to preserve traditions while communists destroy tradition. So although Echo magazine is I would say a good magazine because it's not it's more it focuses more on local culture in Taiwan. And Chinese cultural Renaissance movement is more focused on a canonized, a more Beijing-centered culture. So these two paths is different. Echo is a little bit different from the state's policy. But I would say the purpose still echo each other in the way of preserving tradition. Okay, so in the nativist cultural movement, the other path is the political. So during the 1970s, the rising of Maoism around the world has made significant impact in visual art everywhere in the world. But in Taiwan, this kind of protest or revolutionary art is nearly non-existent. Even art forms that are not directly associated with Maoism but tend to the social realistic or social historical things are very few. And the other reason causing this is because the dominant trend of abstract form, the dominant trend during this time is the abstract form. And it's not just the abstract form implanted from the West, it's a synthesis of East and West, which allow them to gain huge international fame during this period. And this kind of trend has also marginalized realism. So Wu Yaozhong is one of the very few artists who dedicate in social realism who survives in post-war era. Yeah. So on the right hand, you can see this distressed man. This is painted by Wu Yaozhong in year 1962, a painting called Long Night. You can see, actually his technique inherited from his teacher Li Meishu. And Li Meishu dedicates in a style of realism, but Wu Yaozhong somehow is unsatisfied with simply this more idealist realism. So he turned to social realism, and you can see how he began to express sort of uneasiness, political uneasiness in this painting. And on the right side, you can also see the book cover he made, which is a depiction of construction worker, an iconic scene of social realism. So I'll get to my main point. How much time I have? I'll talk about art criticism during this period. I will take Li Shuangze, for example. Li Shuangze wrote an article criticizing the art trend at this time. He says the abstract style of East and West synthesis that dominate the art scene is a utilization of ethnic mode in order to obtain an international mode to succeed in the arena of global art. And he also criticized the Hong Kong. Hong Kong is an outsider artist who gets very famous in the 70s. You can see his painting style on the right side. So Hong Kong, he is not criticizing Hong Kong's art. He is criticizing the phenomenon around Hong Kong's art. This is used by art professional as a prototype of ethnic mode to be presented to the West. So Li Shuangze is a talented person who does a lot of things. He also started learning painting since high school, and had his first exhibition in Meixinchu. Meixinchu is USIS Lincoln Center in Taipei. He has his first exhibition there, and these are his painting exhibited during that time. This painting should be in color, but the materials I found are in black and white. You can see this painting, although they are not as political as Wu Yaozhong's painting, but you can see his nativist turn, which attend to local sceneries in Taiwan. So this is an interesting piece of writing he wrote called a dialogue with a Filipino college student. I think this is an iconic piece that discloses the third world perspective in the 70s, which is my title of my talk today. The dialogue starts with the dialogue takes place between a Chinese and a Filipino at a bar in Manila, where U.S. country music is played. And this dialogue involves almost all the major social historical themes of the Philippines. They argue about what is developing countries, and the English education in the Philippines, and Philippines' role in the Spanish-American War, and the returning of Japanese to Philippines as tourists after World War II. And the dialogue ends with a very humorous remark. The Philippine college student asked the Chinese, there is not a single foreign visitor who is interested in knowing Philippines unless he is a secret agent. So he asked him, hey, are you an agent from the CIA? So this sarcastic ending has somewhat ensured what we call inter-Asia. I ran out of time. Okay, fast forward. I'll skip three. Okay, I'll skip here. Okay, so apart from Li Shuangze's writing, which has more or less a direct communication with Philippines, because he traveled there. Many of his writings on the Philippines were written during his trip to the Philippines, so it's like a more physical contact. And also because he is a he is a second generation of overseas Chinese in Philippines. So this is also a family connection. But the second part of my research, I will deal with art histories that do not directly communicate each other, but echo each other very closely. So we will see two manifestos. The left one is a manifesto from 雄狮 Art Monthly, 雄狮美术, declared in 1976 in Taiwan. And the right-hand side, we can see a manifesto from a group of artists in Philippines called Kaisaham. Kaisaham means solidarity, oneness. So the left-hand side manifesto and the right-hand side manifesto, they really echo each other in the ways of such as a criticism of a criticism of Western-oriented culture and how to preserve tradition. It is not a way of looking at the past. It's not a way of idealized tradition. It's more like a way of rediscovering. And but you can see some difference. On the right-hand side, for the Filipino artists, they are more leftist oriented. For instance, art is for the masses, not for the few. But in Taiwan, we wouldn't say that. It's too dangerous to say that. Yeah. So a comparison of Taiwan and the Philippines can be put in brief. Despite the similarity in both manifestos, the space for political expression in art is different in Taiwan and Philippines. Philippine artists have more space to convey political message at different levels. Why? Despite the similarity in global geopolitics, which is both Taiwan and Philippines are among the same geomilitary strategic locations, which is alliance with the U.S. in post-war era and among the U.S. first island Chen military operation. But they are different in domestic situation because Taiwan's martial law has prevented almost any socialist tendency, and not to mention any communists from organizing. In comparison, communist activities in the Philippines are always present, although the activities underwent changes during different periods of time. So we can see some very interesting artworks from Filipino artists, and you can sense the difference from Taiwanese artists. The first is the revolution protest art in the Philippines. At the left-hand side, you can see it's not very clear because this is the only material I found. This is from 1971, called Spoliarium of Our Time, which is a remake from a 19th century art into a more socialist theme. It says in the picture there are imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucratic capitalism. So it's a very leftist iconic art. And on the right-hand side, you can see a satire cartoon made by Danilo Dalina. In the middle, you can see that's Ferdinand Marcos, and at the top, of course, it's Uncle Sam from US. And this is the social realism in the Philippines. But I would not say it's socialism to a full extent. It's more like between protest art and social realism. The left-hand side is the manifesto I just quoted from the group of artists called Kaisaham. That's their first exhibition, the poster. The right, okay. Fast forward to, okay, wrap it up. Okay, this is my favorite. This is more historical approach made by an artist called Ben Cabrera. And at the left side, you can see a work called Brown Brothers Burden. You can sense by its name, it's a reversal of Rudyard Kipling's poem, White Man's Burden, but it's reversed, Brown Brothers Burden. I'll finish. So, my theoretical purpose of my research mainly, is to how to build a comparative model in art history. And I'll skip. So how to relate the art history taking place in different Asian countries. And my purpose is not to idealize third-worldism. I want to provide a common historical framework through third-worldism, but I do not intend to eliminate the internal differences in the local countries. So, okay, I'll finish up.
Okay, very good.
First, I would like to thank Professor Liu to invite us to be here. My name is Ko-Lun Chen. So far, now I'm the Post-Doctoral Fellow in ICCS. And today I'm going to talk about this is one part of my broader research project. It's about Cold War globalization. And now today I would like to talk about this contents, but I put it in the brackets because it's a bit complicated. But my main research target is about the modern theater in Taiwan and Asia. And after I gave this topic, and I'm also thinking about whether there's a true so-called Taiwanese modern theater, or actually we are talking about the modernization or modernity of the theater in Taiwan, and also correlated to the other place around Eastern Asia or even in Southeast Asia. So let's rethink about it. Okay. So my research focus first is about, in theoretical sense, is about aesthetics, political philosophy, cultural theory, and of course theater studies. And a kind of broader sense of my project is the intellectual history of modern theater in Taiwan and Asia, and mostly concerns the colonialism, the Cold War, martial law regime, and also the globalization. And this, I hope it's too small, sorry. I shouldn't use this effect. Okay, anyway, this is my PhD thesis. And my PhD thesis, the title is Politics of the End of the Martial Law Period and Cold War Aesthetics, Retreating the Discourse and Practice of Taiwan Little Theater Movement. And this historical period is from 1986 to 1996. So the research target is mainly about Taiwan's little theater movement. This kind of very important movement along with the end of martial law period. Because along with the end of martial law period in the late 80s, there's a lot of social, political movement. And this Taiwan little theater movement has been considered part of it. It's not just artistic movement, it's also the political, social movement. And so it's definitely about the martial law period, and also I particularly talk about the Cold War globalization, because intellectually all these new ways to perform, or new ways to present theatrical work is kind of appropriate from the Western knowledge, or happen from nowhere but been interpreted by the Western knowledge. So that's one part. And theoretically, I also take the analysis of the region of the sensible, if you kind of familiar with Jacques Rancière, but I'm not actually using his theories, but I'm using some of his ideas to unfold my way of analysis. And two of very important theatrical activists and also the artist, one still alive is Wang Molin, and the other one already passed away is Tian Qiyuan. This mostly what I'm talking about in my PhD thesis. But actually, I would like to say something about this because if you're familiar with the theater studies in Taiwan, we actually do not agree on one certain kind of historical interpretation. And even we do not have a history of so-called Taiwanese modern theater. And it also relates to other broader questions around the Asian modernity, something like that. I will bring it up later. So, and now I'm at this stage of my project is about theatrical knowledge and artistic production during the Cold War globalization in Taiwan. And there's actually two ways of moving to push forward and backward, actually, to my in this stage. The pushing forward is after my PhD thesis. I end my PhD thesis in the mid of 90s. So I would like to continue analyzing the knowledge, artistic production, and social practice of Taiwanese theater from the mid to the late 90s. And it involved at least three major groups and people. One is Li Huanxiong. Later, I would like to pick up some example from Li Huanxiong. And then other groups like Chai Shi Theater. Chai Shi Theater had launched a series of cooperation with theatrical groups from Southeast Asia and had produced kind of very famous production called Cry for Asia with some Filipino theater. And then after that also I would like to go back to Wang Moli because recently in these years he started a series of kind of historical analysis, put it in his production. It's very interesting. He just launched a series of this project. And also, to move it backward, I would like to trace back the theatrical movement striking around East Asia in the 1920s with some emancipatory thoughts such as this kind of work is just like a historical excavation on the influence of maybe something like May 4th movement to Taiwan, this kind of impact. Actually, we really need to excavate it because the material is very rare. Yeah, so, but I do find out some links and some trace that we can go back to talk about Taiwanese theater in Taiwan in the 20s, the relations of this one and their relationship between May 4th movement. Okay, so that's back to why I'm talking about intellectual history, but not some sort of art history of the modern theater in Taiwan. There's a few different. Actually, I already mentioned some of it just now. There's a few related, maybe you say it's a pragmatics or concept or historical period. From the very top, I just talked about the theatrical modernity in East Asia. It's very complicated because maybe before the end of 19th century, there's no current concept. There's not a concept of modern theater. There's always, now we can go back and look at the theater before maybe in early 19th century. We would call it traditional theater, something like Chinese opera or in Japan kabuki, something like that. But after that we have, of course, the Reformation or reformism. But why the theatrical activists or artists would like to reform themselves to be modern? Then we will relate it to the colonialism, imperialism, because at its time the imperialism invade Asia, something like that. But at the same time, we will have the idea of revolutionism. And then through this development, we will see a populationism, and then we will see how to use theater to gather newer people. Then we have identitarian nationalism. And then back to Taiwan, we have influence from martial law period. We have influence from Cold War Cold War, and also then we talk about the globalization. I use the word globalization not in. I do not believe. Of course, I think you will be agree that globalization is not a new term in this era. We are going to talk about different historical mechanism or historical apparatus in different kind of globalization, even back to ancient Roman or ancient China. But I'm talking about the globalization maybe post-World War II. Okay, so as we see, when we go back to look at this concept or certain historical period, we have to employ deploy or practice some historical analysis, and then we would try to find out what the intellectual history of this project. Okay, so I would like to briefly talk about a short history of post-war theatrical development in Taiwan. Then, as I just said, we have legacy of East Asian modern theater from late 19th century to the first half of the 20th century. On the left side, we have Xinju. This is a legacy of the modernization of Japanese theater, and it includes revolutionism, some social reformism from Japan. I mean the ideas, the concept, but why this kind of Xinju or Japanese modern theater will come to Taiwan is because the imperial colonial literary regime. So that part. And on the right hand side we have Hui-Yu. Hui-Yu is the legacy of May 4th movement. You can consider it as kind of a modernization of Chinese modern theater. And it also includes revolutionism and reformism, and also very important because this kind of modernization is also have been considered some sort of westernization. So it happened to have appropriationism. So we have this legacy, and then also we have contemporary influence on the left-hand side. I talk about the compact literature or anti-communist theater. Compact literature is, I don't know whether we have this term in other places other than Taiwan. I don't know, but compact literature in Mandarin is 战斗文艺. Yeah, it mainly use art to mobilize your people against communists. So at that time is just about after 1949 or around late 40s, the nationalist government started their literary policy to have anti-communist theater. So I call this part the martial law literary regime. Is mostly about the official propaganda, and also the other part. In this part, we also have Cold War literary regime. It's a global red purge. So at that time, Taiwan is part of the liberal camp of the Cold War. So it formed this kind of influence, and also so you can see on the right hand side, because we're mainly influenced by the United States, and mainly we contribute ourselves to the liberal camp. So most of the time, the so-called Taiwanese modern theater learn from Western classics, or some post-war avant-garde or aesthetic experiments, something like that, something like counterculture or the postmodernism. It happens in this sense. So we have these four parts of the legacy and influence and constitute the so-called Taiwanese modern theater. But so we have, I would like to skip this part because it's a bit longer. But we do have two mainstream discourses about the history of Taiwanese modern theater. The first one is called the West Tai. In Chinese it's 西潮论, West Tai Thesis. And you can say that the main is about starting from May 4 movement China, or the modernization of Japanese theater from late 19th century to early 20th century. The Western knowledge has always been the dominant power to bring about the influence in each field of thought and literary artistic practice. So, if you this kind of thesis have been advocated by one of the very important scholar Ko-Lun in Taiwan, and you can say I theorize is kind of naturalizing the exteriority, that all the influence is so self-evident and dominant. Okay, so then the other thesis is a revolutionary thesis, 革命论, also advocated by the other scholar called Zhong Mingde. And mainly about though the Western ties has been influencing several times to Taiwan or broadly to East Asia, there should always be some certain counter-discursive practice after each time, namely some revolutionary acts of localization. Okay, 5 more minutes. So it's about then, but for this kind of thesis, he wants to cut up anything influenced from the past, and after every Western tie, there's a new chance to have a reborn. For this time, it's a newborn locality. By using postmodern thinking to clear up empty space to locate this newborn locality. So anyhow, so I would just skip. So actually, my way of doing all these projects is to be sure is problematizing as well as historical criticizing. So I will have put this historical stage and try to theorize the important discursive practice, and also analyze the question from the non-discursive part, just like sometimes Michel Foucault would say, the investigation of real political events, economic phenomena, institutional realizations and their change, or say how these material transformation in appearance take part in discursive formation. So after that, the other one I would like to talk about is Bruce Cummings. He's very famous. His book is very worth reading, and he is the expert of East Asia countries, political economy. And there's one thing I would like to talk about him is from the bureaucratic authoritarian industrializing regime, just like Taiwan or Korea. He finds out that inside this kind of non-discursive appearance, there's a discursive core about it. It's related to hegemonic power in its interest. It's a particular kind of ethos as a final product brought about by the certain kind of political economy and its network. Say, in American Center, that would be Grand Area, or I would say this very Cold War division that form a certain way of life to incorporate into hegemony from consumption of daily supplies to a particular kind of worldview. So back to what I'm trying to talk about today. I'll skip this part. Okay. Then I pick up this example. This is a work by Li Huanxiong. There's a theater called He Zuoan, mainly mean the left side of the river. And then this work is adopted from one of the very famous novelists in Taiwan, Chen Yingzhen. And this short story, actually this is a short story called 无自照样太阳, and it means the sun shines solidly. And there's a scene about people sitting on the chair and kind of twisted and then bent to one side. And at that time, the postmodernist scholar in Taiwan would say that, okay, they learned from Robert Wilson, Einstein on the beach. But actually, including Li Huanxiong or all these actors, no one have ever seen Einstein language. So it's nothing to do with Robert Wilson. So this is one thing. So we see how the postmodern knowledge of thinkings influence all this theatrical work, and then try to interpret it in their discourse. So I'll skip this part. And then the other interesting, I call it the contemporary oddity, is timely reading, because we know this work have been written by Chen in late 60s, and it's mainly about the post-World War II, the contradiction between generation. Some intellectual or rich people educated and made their success in Japanese colonial time. But after World War II, they kind of feel sorry about themselves because they cannot have the better life before. And then I'm going to end this because this is really very interesting. And there's another young tutor of this rich family. He is a new intellectual after not actually born after World War II, but learn his knowledge and got his job after World War II. So it's a new generation. There's old generation. So in the rich family, there is a girl is dying, and this tutor is this girl's teachers. So the whole story is about this girl is about to die, and this girl is very sad about an accident of mine workers. People die, and then in Chen Yingzhen's short story, it's mainly about how this young tutor envy rich family, even show some desire to this young girl, and then at the end of the story, the girl died. So that's mainly about the short story. But in the adaptation, this is theatrical adaptation. The girl did not die, and all the mine workers become some kind of ghost. You see, in all this tilted body is actually the died mine workers, and they try to represent some kind of ghosts and take away and to claim this young girl. And we do not have any kind of contradiction between generations, because Li Huanxiong wants to emphasize some sort of socialist idea. And by using this kind of representation, he believed he used a very realistic way to present it. But if you take a look, if you have a chance to take a look at the video clip, it's not about the realistic at all. All these people have been trained by Grotowski methodology. So you see, that is the second, the later part of my research. I'm going to investigate how to compare or to do some interview to get to know why the theatrical adaptation and the original novel would have this kind of difference. So I would just end here.
It somehow reminds me.
So how will we know the time when it ends?
I would like to know 5 minutes before you should end, and then Changcha.
Okay. Hello everyone, and thank you Professor Liu and everyone here in this room for having us. And it is such a nostalgic feeling to get back to thesis and talk about it again. Although it's only 1 year back. I graduated a year back actually. So my name is Poonam. Oh, sorry. The computer also upgraded actually. We used to have the old one. Okay. Okay, my name is Poonam Sharma, and I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at the International Center for Cultural Studies. That is our own center. And I received my PhD last year, and I major in migration studies from the Institute of Social Research and Cultural Studies. And I received my master's degree in 2015 from National Chonghwa University, and I majored in cultural studies at that time at Institute of Sociology. Okay, so my PhD thesis was quite elaborate, so I would like to tell the primary aspects of my PhD thesis, and also along the way I would tell you what aspects helped me and also I think would help you guys to write your thesis in the future. And now my research specialization focuses on migration studies primarily, citizenship and immigration policies, and secondarily on post-colonial theories, which also interests me a lot. And okay, before I begin, I would like to share a little background with you guys, because I was born and brought up in India. So when I was a child and during my growing years and when I was a teenager, I used to see the Bangladeshi migrants, everyone, and doing all sorts of labor jobs, menial labor jobs, working as domestic helpers. Even in my household, we used to have a maid. And that time I never realized that their existence is so critical, so important to study, to reflect so many things in the society. And we were not allowed to talk to them, and they were treated as something else. And of course, like everyone, I think the locals, childs like me, everyone grew up thinking that, okay, this is a very normal thing. They are someone else and we are someone else. We are not allowed to talk to them. They used to dress up in a particular way. They used to talk in a particular way. And in several households, because in my town, in my city, the process was if you employ a laborer to do something, then you have to provide lunch. And I used to see these people sitting outside their houses to have lunch. They were not allowed to even dine with everyone. So there are some experiences that gradually also helped me to curb down my thesis as the work I did, because all these memories also somewhat help you a lot, I think. Background, I mean. Although at that time you don't realize the importance of it, but gradually when you start critically thinking and understanding the value of academically writing and pointing out these factors. Okay, so the title of my thesis is The Invisible Politicized Roles and Religious Disorganization of Bangladeshi and Nepali Migrants in West Bengal and Northeast India. So I did not focus on the Bangladeshi alone. I focused on two groups of migrants who are very different, which I'm going to tell you, and why I choose both these groups who are different. Okay, thesis overview to start. The study focused on the migration of irregular Bangladeshi and Nepali migrants to east and northeastern parts of India, which is almost covering the eastern parts. It has aimed to highlight the politicized roles and unequal religious treatment of these two groups of migrants in the host society. The religious factor is the main dividing factor for the Nepalis and Bangladeshis in India. I argue that the most unwanted subjects in the society, and the migrants in this case, who are my subjects, do change roles and which they are mostly unaware of sometimes, most of the times I think, regulated by political patronage in a championship of power. I briefly explained the government apparatuses in the form of citizenship and immigration laws, border policies, and communal division that highlights socio-political disturbances under the modern concept of nation-states headed by political powers. Okay, all these things were developed while I was writing my thesis. I did not think it before that I will go on to explain the government apparatus. I just started with the aim of understanding the lives of these migrants. But eventually, on the way, you develop all these factors. Okay, so if I show you the map, then this is the green part altogether, and the West Bengal, you see, on the eastern side. So that was my research area, and I was talking about migration from two countries. You see Nepal And I can't move the mouse. Yeah, sorry. Okay, Nepal and and Bangladesh. So I was talking about migration from both these areas to the whole eastern part of India. Okay, now the first thing, understanding the motivation of study. The first 3 points that I write, holding an overview of theoretical and practical problems of the study, analyzing my ideas and the existing data, asking myself why I want to do this topic, were the first initial questions that every one of us might ask yourself, And other than the personal encounters, which I just told you before, and then many others subsequently following this, because after that I never studied in my hometown, came out of my hometown. So whenever I used to go and I used to travel around India, I used to see these people, when I used to think. And later Professor Liu helped me to critically analyze the situations, Okay, but it's not enough. This is completely not enough. We need to have academic works to support our work, A collaborative work addressing the political, social roles of the Bangladeshis looked not only rare but quite negligible when I started to look for it. The Bangladeshi migration gathered all the attention for its religious differences in media highlight because they were a lot in numbers, they were religiously different, and they had many examples of violence with the natives and the locals, Although not a threat, but the stories of social struggles of other groups of migrants, in this case the Nepalis whom I have chosen, remains a reality even today. But they are less discussed, and this is the reason I choose 2 groups of migrants. Okay, pictures like this, they give you constant motivation and reason why you should go, and the media, the Indian media will portray this kind of pictures. They write, you see the 2 million ration cards is a kind of identity card, or a card which is further used to have documentary citizenship. So this kind of news, this kind of pictures in the media will always help you to, understand that why these topics are worth a study. Okay, now this is a step that every one of us follows, refining the research question. The first step of your, research work: decide question, identify studies, obtain material, and what you want to do, and the question. Okay, now literature analysis and finding prospects. As I told you that it is very important for us to support our work with literature. We cannot just rely on our own expectations and our stories. So these are some of the first works that I found among many. Okay, so the first 4 people, they talk about the lack of studies in this area. The first one, the impact of globalization, the roles of illegal vote banks severely placed to destabilize a nation's definition of citizenship, and the mainstream study on migrants and their political roles do not address the situation of Assam and the Northeast region. This was said by Barua in 2009. He is also a scholar from the region, and he currently resides in the United States. A large number of illegal immigration taking place in the developing countries do not provide useful theories relevant to citizenship and related concepts. The statements on the future of Northeast as a complicated zone while considering the influx of the unwanted large number of illegal vote banks. This is by newspapers because the government officials, the ministers, used to term that, okay, in the long run, Northeast is going to get merged with Bangladesh, merged with this state. So these are several statements made. So I could not put all of them here. So I just put collaborative. It was pointed out that the migration-related studies of the developing and the third world nations are often submerged within the mainstream cases of migration. And these people talked about migration and illegal voters. For example, Datta pointed out that the property rights, she states that it is because of non-restrictive and lenient policies towards illegal migration in the Indian political circles and furtherance of the illegal voters. Rasul Mahmood claims that the migration activities emerged due to appalling economic conditions, which convinces the Bangladeshis to enter India even after facing a lot of risk and threats while crossing the borders. Samadar calls the series of natural disasters that wrecked the nation of Bangladesh and its people as the main cause of unwanted migration that got erupted after its formation. and Samshad in 2001 estimated that only 3 million Bangladeshis were there in India, but he noted that around 30 million Bangladeshis claimed for political benefits in only Northeast India. Okay. So these were some of the figures that and some of the statements that I considered that okay, I should start working on the topic that I have decided. Okay, now it was important for me to connect past to the present because it was a vast topic, and Bangladesh and Nepal. I started from the British colonial rule for Bangladesh part because it was only after that India was separated into two different Bangladesh and Pakistan. Present-day Bangladesh and Pakistan was carved out of India, and then the migration of these people started. So I focused on these aspects to understand the narrative of Bangladeshi migration to India, the British colonial rule, the division of Bengal presidency in India, the formation of Bangladesh, the famine-driven Bangladesh that Samadar talks about, the friendliness between Indian National Congress and Bangladesh government seat in Dhaka, which also opened many treaties during that time, and then the migration started. The narrative of Nepalese migration to India, the influence and promotion during British colonial rule. Also, the Nepalese started to migrate to India during the British colonial rule because they were employed in the tea estates of Northeast India. So the British officers used to invite them. They were also working as armies in the British Indian regiments. First Nepali migration was in the year 1768 to 1769. The migration of Nepali hill population tribals were the first who migrated, and gradually the Gorkha regiment formed, which is one of the renowned even today. The workforce demanded under the British colonialism. Okay, so these were the narratives for the Nepalese migration to India. And then I came to focus on the present contemporary movements gradually from the past to the present. The most popular agitation was recorded from, this started in 1978, the largest movement against, so all these movements were against the illegal migrants actually. So first was in 1979 to 1985. This went in for 7 years, and it is said that this movement totally transformed the lives of many people. Like my grandfathers were there at that time. I think they were young, or they were, could understand. So houses changed, people had to surrender certain things, properties, many things. Okay, the Nelly massacre and the killing of over 2,000 victims. People who could not speak the local dialect, considering that they are outsiders. The religious violence between the largest tribe and the powerful tribe called Boro tribe in the Northeast India and the Bangladeshis in July 2019. The separatist attacks, the protest against the recent amendment bill, that is a very latest thing, 2019, still ongoing but halted due to the pandemic. So, okay, now the research methodology. Okay, I will go first. So this is one of the most important things that we have to consider while writing a thesis. Okay, so my doctoral research was primarily based on interviews, informal conversations, understanding behavioral patterns of migrants in India. I focused on Bangladeshi and Nepali migrants, and it was one of the most pleasant time of my thesis because I could meet those people, which was unexpected. My field work was conducted in segments that covered a timeline of approximately 2 years. I traveled to 5 states of Northeast and West Bengal. I have in total contacted around 60 migrants. I realized that fieldwork helps us to connect to the subject's emotions and understand problems beyond our research questions. Providing a comfort zone to the subjects and securing their identities while writing an academic work is crucial because some of them were not ready to tell me anything. They thought I'm some government agent, maybe trying to take their accounts, and maybe we are working to let them throw out of the country. So it is very difficult to convince them sometimes. Additionally, I have also traveled to countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Hong Kong to broaden my outlook of understanding the migrants issue in Asia, which is what I'm doing now. Okay, for example, I used my data to answer every small question of my thesis. Like for example, if someone asks me what are the factors for migration from Bangladesh, I just use their opinions to, you know, segregate in percentage and provide. So it is more clear and more accurate. So the example, these are the pictures taken by me. This is the slums they stay, and this is a very remote village in a state called Nagaland in northeast India. This is the Nepali village, Nepali hut, and this is a Bangladeshi slum. Okay, research framework. It's very important to develop a research framework, and this is a research framework. I'll just go very fast. These are my arguments. I have argued that the measures used in administering the minority communities has contributed to the emergence of a disturbing environment for the nation as a whole. By the present nation states operate in desire to control their national population, it tries to control its access to benefits and movements outside the nation's boundaries. Here I want to argue that the border policies have highly impacted the demography and political shape of Northeast and West Bengal. It is due to the continuous revising of strategies and policies for border control that has gradually paved the way for what Genova at all terms as the deportation regime. I have many other arguments, but I just cited some of them. By citing this term, I do not mean that the Indian government should work to deport the migrants, but it is a policy that political powers frequently brings to the limelight, and that it is the reason that has constantly traumatized not only the Bangladeshi migrants, but also other groups of migrants. Although in completely different ways and patterns, both these groups are brought under a common political and social umbrella in this research. It has provided a brief narration of their transformative roles, positions, and situations in the Northeast and West Bengal of the Indian society. Now, making a transition is the most important question that we, as young scholars, ask ourselves. Okay, thesis, then what next? So there is possibility that you will find subtopics, events in your thesis that will give you further questions. For me, these two events gave me further questions that told me that this is not enough. You need to go beyond this, these two events. So one was the NRC. These two are laws, immigration laws, citizenship policies initiated. One was when I was writing a thesis in 2016. So it has mentioned in my thesis, but the other one was after I graduated. So it is not mentioned in my thesis. Okay. So these two events gave me the transition aspects. So surprisingly, this is what completely contradict what the government policies. So this was one proof that I need to go beyond that. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my ongoing works, and I believe that referring to current events and issues and connecting them to our research area interest is the most crucial step to update the research progress. And you know the COVID-19 has given us innumerable prospects to study. So one of the paper that I'm working on is how will COVID-19 impact India's internal migration forever. This is a book chapter that I'm writing now. And this focuses on the plight of labor migrants in India during the nationwide lockdown that was initiated by the government as the first major step to prevent the virus from mass spreading, and then started the vulnerability of the labor migrants and how it will change. It has changed, it will change forever. And okay, next is an article. This article is very important, very special for me. I'll tell you why. This title, The Identity Question of Irregular Migrants in South Asia, the Centrality of Being Legal or Illegal. And I'm moving my prospect beyond India now, because I want to go to use my experiences that I took in other countries, and also primary literature that I'm working on. So this article is important because it will be translated into Mandarin when I finish it. And the third is extraction from my PhD research and being reviewed recently. The migrant politics and the concept of citizenship in India, and it has the introductions of and debates over the two government policies that I told you helped me to transit from my thesis, that is the NRC and the CEA. And it depicts the contemporary migrant politics and citizenship laws in the contemporary Indian society. Okay, so analyzing the future is just going beyond what you have done. So if I work on India, I cannot stick to it. I have to broaden it and go to other similar examples where I can apply my research framework and what I did in my PhD. So focusing on other examples in Asia. That's why I put this map. Okay, a jump from India to Asia, is that how I transit and what I'm looking to do in the future. By emphasizing on ethnocultural complexities and sensitive of colonial traces of some part of Asia, this research will form a comparative study among different South and East Asian countries. Significantly, I aim for a comparative study among various Asian nations to highlight the difference in government policies, citizenship laws, border politics, with varying ways and patterns of handling the migrant crisis that has been recorded in the contemporary times. I try to understand what middle position is created for the existence of immigrant diasporas under different governments. Who helps them to create these midways, and what are the factors responsible for creating them? While the whole complication of immigrants and citizens lie within the question of citizenship, the study looks at the concept of citizenship and the role of immigrants with some important critical theories. And thank you everyone for listening.
Hi everyone. First, I thank you. You guys come here to listen my presentation, and I thank Professor Liu to invite me. But I want to apologize first. I got sick these days. But don't afraid, it's not COVID-19 or the flu. I'm afraid of the influence of the medicine. So I think I'm still read my manuscripts to control the time. So
Just don't fall asleep.
okay.
While you speak.
Yeah. Okay. My academic pursuit presented an interdisciplinary experience with training in accounting, sociology, and literary study. My research interests include cultural studies, gender, sexuality, and queer studies, modern and contemporary Chinese literature. During my master training in sociology, I began to investigate the subculture of gay men in contemporary Taiwan 20 years ago. So this is my master thesis. I studied the 哥哥弟弟, something like the butch and fin or T-po in Taiwan lesbian community. So on the one hand, I consider the representation, subjectivities, and the power operations of homosexuals as a marginalized and stigmatized minority in their everyday life. On the other hand, I explored the discourse formations and the signifying practices within the intersection of sexuality and gender. So in my master research, I draw data from a wide range of sources, including queer theory, novels, online forums, film and television works, interviews, and ethnography. So by analyzing materials in different fields, my master thesis articulates various factors to represent this gay man subculture. Last year, I obtained my PhD degree from Chinese Department of Chonghwa University in Hsinchu. My dissertation explored the intersection of sexualities and social relations through research, historical documents, and literary works about the male homoerotic relationship. My project began with departed from the following research questions. What is homosexuality under specific historical, cultural conditions and knowledge power regimes? How are same-sex desires and affection understood, produced, and self-configured? How can we rework relational connections and ethical imagination of homosexuality? And I examined the genealogy of Chinese epistemology and the historical relations of homosexuality from the early Republic era, 民国 to 21st centuries. In particular, I investigated the historical periods from 1910 to 1914, during which the meaning of homosexuality was still unsettled. The translation and the circulation from abroad these times of this vocabulary not only embodied transcultural modernity in Republic China, but also represented an epistemological aspect of sexual modernity in East Asia. By reconsidering the three modes of epistemology about homosexuality, the P pathology mode, its translation translated from the Europe sex science journal, and sometimes the intellectual in that times they learn sexual science about homosexuality from Japan, but the Japan intellectual translate the scientific knowledge from Europe. And the second one is the moralized mode. The media will focus on the girl students or women in that time to focus on their homoerotic behavior or relationship. So the three time is my focus, is my thesis focus. The arrows relationally connected mode. So I studied young intellectual named Hu Qiuyuan on the left side. He translated and rewrite a British thinker who is a communist, not communist, anarchist, anarchist thinker. He write many books about homosexuality, like the famous one is on the right side, the intermediate sex. His name is Edward Carpenter. So Hu Qiuyuan translated and rewrite and introduced this book to the Republic China. And the other type is another anarchist. His name is Lu Jianpo, and another one is Chen. They learn about many sex and gender knowledge from another anarchist in American. On the left side is Emma Goldman. So my focus, my thesis focus on this kind of epistemology of homosexuality. So my study conceptualized utopia and eros and utopia of eros and stigma, a notion that connoted multiple temporal and spatial significance to address sex, gender, subjects, stigmas, life conditions, intermediate relations, and approaches of living together. So as I forming my doctoral research project, the same-sex marriage movement and the debates were also heated in the past 10 years. The debates on same-sex marriage inspired my research inquiry. The movement began in North America and quickly spread to the whole world and some countries of East Asia, including Taiwan. The controversy was not just about gay marriage, but was also involved the conflict situations embedded in every country's geopolitical, historical, and cultural context. My research will attempt to outline the extensiveness of homosexuality in multiple temporal and spatial contexts. I pay particular attention to the tensions and the entanglement between the local everyday life, the gay rights movement, the anti-gay religious associations, and the queer critical discourses. On the one hand, I think this kind of entanglement seems to indicate the situation where queers in the Third World live in the post-Cold War or the new Cold War area under neoliberal globalization. And on the other hand, I suspect that this kind of situation may also be the reason why my friends and other queers need to endure every time or even choose to die in the end. By analyzing homosexual literature, my project hopes to advance an imagination of situation in which cisgender minorities as well as all subjected subjects will survive, live, and act together. So my core problematic is my project explores the meaning and the effects of homosexual epistemology. There is transformation of knowledge power, relations of homosexualities in the process of modernity. My research agenda continues to ask what and how sex-gender subject formations are in multiple temporal and spatial East Asia modernities. By using a cultural studies approach, it is to explore the historical process of knowledge productions and the struggle of discourse practices. The methodology focuses on conjunctural analysis and the effects and the ethics of dimensions at the same time. In order to consider the epistemologies of sex-gender subjectivities in East Asia, I hope that I can juxtapose the histories of our traditions, such as male beauty, like Nanfeng, in the Ming Dynasty, and the histories of the Third World as cross-reference resources, and carry out the work of decolonization and the empire in the knowledge productions and the structure of feelings. So this is my long-term and mid-term, short-term project. Sorry, in Chinese. It's a temporal and the spatial dimension, and my long-term projects want to rewrite or to think about the sex modernity in Asia, East Asia. So I will try to write about, use the homosexual literature and discourse to rewrite like the historical of sex or sexuality in Sinophone world. Oh, and another one is I want to compare the homosexuality situation or literature work in Vietnam. So maybe it's my midterm project. So my current research, I now explore historical events such as the Cold War, the White Terror, the military relations between Taiwan and the United States, and the US aid system in the 1950s and 1960s by focusing on discourses of sex gender. My research asks how did the subjectivity of queer in the Third World emerge within the Cold War in East Asia? What kind of living conditions and the structure of feelings were these subjects? I will discuss post-war literary works from the 1950s to the new century in Taiwan. These writings not only face the legacy of the dual war structure, which the ideologies of anti-communist and the Cold War has yet to be decolonized and de-empires. That is, the various effects of Cold War modernities in East Asia, but also inhabits within the state of knowledge and the effects under the effects of the historical division of the post-Cold War nation states. Literary works are not only relaxed but also battlefields for shaping sex gender subjects. So my current research object is the memorial of Peter Feng on the left side, a popular literature writer in the 1960s. His works, Wu Hang, Misty Voyager, detailed that during the White Terror, he was not only framed as a spy from the Third International and he was imprisoned, but also treated as a sex slave by naval officers and soldiers while in prison. The Kuomintang KMT intelligence agent even threatened him as a spy to use his male beauty for obtaining intelligence from the US military advisors. So I will also discuss the award-winning novel Ghost Place 鬼地方 this year by Kevin Chen, Chen. In this novel, the narrator's father, who has a young gay lover, and the other gay couple who opened a bookstore in the country, in Taiwan, they organized a secret communist reading club. They were reported and imprisoned because the book about communists and the leftists were banned in the White Terror period in post-Taiwan. Okay. The final. When we face the anti-communist ideology and education in the history of Cold War in East Asia, how should we think about the tension and the contradiction between homosexuality and Marxism? I will use literary works and archives to explore the historical relationship between sex, gender, and the left-wing force in the Third World. My research will bring into horizon of totality with historical analysis of religion, class, ethnicity, and sexuality. It will break away from the deadlocks of universal identity like citizenship and the cultural confrontations with the geopolitics of the new Cold War. My project will dialogue with the Chinese history of homosexualities and the Sinophone queer studies by revisiting the historical process and the influences of modern transformation, imperialism, colonialism, Cold War, post-colonialism, globalization in East Asia. So my courses for next year, two courses. One is follow my research is seminar on sex gender. I will discuss about queers in the Third World in Chinese course in Chinese. And another one is seminar on Michelle Foucault. I will want to read with students the new book of the historical of sex violence 4, which the English version is not yet published. We will publish on 2021 February. So the book name is The Confessions of the Flesh. So we will discuss the historical of sex value 1, value 2, and value 3 quickly, but focus on the value 4. So thank you.
Very good. I want to thank every one of them for giving us such wonderful talks. Let's take a 10 minutes break because we do want to have discussions. Okay, we can have like 35 or 40 minutes for Q&A. So let's take a break, all right? Okay. Thank you.